Sullivan, and other members of the National Security Leadership Team, the Situation Room, to discuss our ongoing efforts to evacuate American citizens, third country civilians, Afghan allies, and vulnerable Afghans. And I want to provide the American people with a brief update on the situation in Afghanistan. Since I spoke to you on Monday, we've made significant progress. We've secured the airport, enabling flights to resume. Not just military flights, but civilian charters and from other countries, and the NGOs taking out civilians and vulnerable Afghanis. And now we have almost 6,000 troops on the ground, including the 82nd Airborne, providing runway security, the Army 10th Mountain Division standing guard around the airport, and the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit assisting the civilian departure. This is one of the largest, most difficult airlifts in history, and the only country in the world capable of projecting this much power on the far side of the world with this degree of precision is the United States of America. We've already evacuated more than 18,000 people since July and approximately 13,000 since our military lift began on August the 14th. Thousands more have been evacuated on private charter flights facilitated by the U.S. government. These numbers include American citizens and permanent residents, as well as their families. It includes SIV applicants and their families, those Afghans who have worked alongside us, served alongside of us, gone into combat with us, and provided invaluable assistance to us, such as translators and interpreters. The United States stands by its commitment that we've made to these people, and includes other vulnerable Afghans, such as women leaders and journalists. In fact, working in close coordination with the management of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, we have successfully evacuated all 204 of their employees in Afghanistan on U.S. military aircraft earlier this week. We've established the flow of flights, and we've increased the number of people we're moving out of the country. We paused flights in Kabul a few hours this morning to make sure we could process the arriving evacuees at the transit points. But our commander in Kabul has already given the order for outbound flights to resume. Even with the pause, we've moved out 5,700 evacuees yesterday. And we're working on a variety to verify that number of the Americans are still in country as we work on this, because don't have the exact number of people who are Americans are there, and those who may have come home to the United States. We want to get a strong number as to exactly how many people are there, how many American citizens, and where they are. Just yesterday, among the many Americans we evacuated, there were 169 Americans who we got over the wall into the airport using military assets. We're also facilitating flights for our allies and our partners, and working in close operational coordination with NATO on this evacuation. For example, we provided overwatch for the French convoy bringing hundreds of their people from the French embassy to the airport. These operations are going to continue over the coming days before we complete our drawdown. We're going to do everything that we can to provide safe evacuation for our Afghan allies, partners, and Afghans who might be targeted because of their association with the United States. But let me be clear. Any American who wants to come home, we will get you home. Make no mistake, this evacuation mission is dangerous. It involves risks to our armed forces, and it's being conducted under difficult circumstances. I cannot promise what the final outcome will be, or what it will be, that it will be without risk of loss. But as Commander-in-Chief, I can assure you that I will mobilize every resource necessary. And as an American, I offer my gratitude to the brave men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces who are carrying out this mission. They're incredible. As we continue to work the logistics of evacuation, we're in constant contact with the Taliban, working to ensure civilians have safe passage to the airport. We're particularly focused on our engagements on making sure every American who wants to leave can get to the airport. Where we have been seeing challenges with Americans, for Americans, we have thus far been able to resolve them. We've made clear to the Taliban that any attack on our forces or disruption of our operations at the airport will be met with swift and forceful response. We're also keeping a close watch on any potential terrorist threat at or around the airport, including from the ISIS affiliates in Afghanistan who were released from prison when the prisons were empty. And because they are, by the way, and make everybody understand that the ISIS in Afghanistan have been the sworn enemy of the Taliban. I've said all along, we're going to retain a laser focus on our counterterrorism mission, working in close coordination with our allies and our partners, and all those who have an interest in ensuring stability in the region. Secretary Blinken is with me today, met this morning with our NATO allies in consultation about the way forward, so that Afghanistan cannot be used in the future as a terrorist base to attack the United States or our allies. For 20 years, Afghanistan has been a joint effort with our NATO allies. We went in together and we're leaving together. And now we're working together to bring our people and our Afghan partners to safety. The past few days, I've also spoken directly with the British Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, Chancellor Merkel of Germany, and President Macron of France. We all agreed that we should convene, and we will convene, the G7 meeting next week, a group of the world's leading democracies, so that together we can coordinate our mutual approach, our united approach in Afghanistan and moving forward. We are united with our closest partners to execute the mission at hand. We've also discussed the need to work with the international community to provide humanitarian assistance such as food aid and medical care for refugees who have crossed into neighboring countries to escape the Taliban, and to bring international pressure on the Taliban with respect to the treatment of Afghan people overall, but including Afghan, particularly women and girls. The past week has been heartbreaking. We've seen gut-wrenching images of panicked people acting out of sheer desperation. You know, it's completely understandable. They're frightened, they're sad, uncertain what happens next. I don't think any one of us can see these pictures and not feel that pain on a human level. Now we have a mission to complete in Afghanistan. It's an incredibly difficult and dangerous operation for our military. We have almost 6,000 of America's finest fighting men and women at the Kabul airport. And we're putting their lives on the line. They're doing it in a dangerous place to save other Americans, our Afghan allies, and citizens of our allies who went in with us. You know, I talk to our commanders on the ground there every single day, as I just did an hour or so ago. And I made it clear to them that we'll get them whatever they need to do the job. They're performing to the highest standard under extraordinarily difficult and dynamic circumstances. Our NATO allies are strongly standing with us. Their troops keeping sentry alongside ours in Kabul, as is the case whenever I deploy our troops into harm's way. I take that responsibility seriously. I carry that burden every day, just as I did when I was vice president and my son was deployed to Iraq for a year. There'll be plenty of time to criticize and second guess when this operation is over. But now, I'm focused on getting this job done. I would ask every American to join me in praying for the women and men risking their lives on the ground in the service of our nation. As events evolve over the coming days, my team and I will continue to share the information and update the American people on exactly where things are. We'll use every resource necessary to carry out the mission at hand and bring to safety American citizens and our Afghan allies. This is our focus now. And when this is finished, we will complete our military withdrawal and finally bring to an end 20 years of American military action in Afghanistan. Thank you. May God bless our troops, our diplomats, and all those serving in harm's way. And now I'll take questions. AP, Zeke Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. You vowed in an election to usher in an era where the world can count on America to live up to its promises. You promised to leave Afghanistan, but you also promised not to help to bring out those who helped America in its war effort. We've seen these heart-wrenching images at the Kabul airport of people trying to get there, say nothing of the people who can't get to that airport. You made the commitment to get American troops out, to get American citizens out. Will you make the same commitment to those who assisted in the American war effort over the last 20 years, number one? And then number two, what is your message to America's partners around the world who have criticized not the withdrawal, but the conduct of that withdrawal and made them question America's credibility on the world stage?
I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world. I've spoken with our NATO allies. We've spoken with NATO allies, the Secretary of State. Our national security advisor has been in contact with his counterparts throughout the world and our allies, as has the general, I keep calling him a general, but my Secretary of Defense. The fact of the matter is, I have not seen that. Matter of fact, the exact opposite I've got. The exact opposite thing is we're acting with dispatch. We're acting, committing to what we said we would do. Look, let's put this thing in perspective here. What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with Al-Qaeda gone? We went to Afghanistan for the express purpose of getting rid of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, as well as getting Osama bin Laden. And we did. Just imagine if that attack, if bin Laden had decided with Al-Qaeda to launch an attack from Yemen, would we ever gone to Afghanistan? Would there ever be any reason we'd be in Afghanistan? Controlled by the Taliban? What is the national interest of the United States in that circumstance? We went and did the mission. You've known my position for a long, long time. It's time to end this war. The estimates of the cost of this war over the last 20 years range from a minimum $1 trillion to a think tank at one of the universities saying $2 trillion. That's somewhere between $150 million a day and $300 million a day. The threat from terrorism has metastasized. There's a greater danger from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these affiliates in other countries by far than there is from Afghanistan. And we're going to retain an over-the-horizon capability that if they were to come back to be able to take them out, surgically move. So this is where we should be. This is about America leading the world. And all our allies have agreed with that. And by the way, before I made this decision, I was at the G7 as well as met with our NATO partners. And I told them all, every one of them knew and agreed with the decision I made to jointly end our involvement in Afghanistan. The first part of your question was, I can't remember now.
Would you commit to the same commitment? Would you make the same commitment to bring out Afghans who assisted in the war effort?
Yes, we're making the same commitment. There's no one more important than bringing American citizens out. I acknowledge that. But they're equally important almost is all those SIVs we call them, who in fact helped us. They were translators. They went into battle with us. They were part of the operation. As well as we're also trying to get out as many NGOs, non-government organizations, women's organizations, etc. We're doing all we can. In the meantime, Secretary Blinken and I am going to be working with our allies to see to it that we can bring international pressure on the Taliban they're looking to gain some legitimacy. They're going to have to figure out how they're going to maintain that country. And there's going to be harsh conditions, strong conditions we're going to apply, and it will depend on whether they get help based on whether or not how and well they treat women and girls, how they treat their citizens. So this is just beginning on that score.
Day past the 31st to make that happen, to bring all the Americans out, to bring those SIVs out.
I think we can get it done by then, but we're going to make that judgment as we go. Now, Justin Sink of Bloomberg.
President. You just said that you would keep a laser focus on counterterrorism efforts, and that you don't see as great of a threat of terrorism from Afghanistan as other parts of the world. But if you and your administration so badly misassessed how quickly the Taliban would sweep through Afghanistan, and we no longer have an embassy there from which to run intelligence operations, how can you at all be confident of your assessment of the risk of terrorism and the ability of the U.S. to conduct over-the-horizon missions to keep it in check? Can you tell Americans that they're safe and will remain safe from terror attacks in Afghanistan?
I think you're comparing apples and oranges. One question was whether or not the Afghan forces we trained up would stay and fight in their own civil war they had going on. No one, I shouldn't say no one, the consensus was that it was highly unlikely that in 11 days they'd collapse and fall and the leader of Afghanistan would flee the country. That's a very different question than whether or not there is the ability to observe whether or not large groups of terrorists begin to accumulate in a particular area in Afghanistan to plot against the United States of America. That's why we retained an over-the-horizon capability to go in and do something about that if that occurs. But in the meantime, we know what's happened around the world. We know what's happening in terms of what's going on in other countries where there is a significant rise of terrorist organizations in the Middle East, in East Africa, and other places. And so the bottom line is we're dealing with those terrorist threats from other parts of the world and failed states without permanent military presence there. We have to do the same in Afghanistan.
Sir, just on that initial assessment, we learned over the last 24 hours that there was a dissent cable from the State Department.
Sure.
Saying that the Taliban would come faster through Afghanistan. Can you say why, after that cable was issued, the U.S. didn't do more to get Americans out?
All kinds of cables, all kinds of advice. If you notice, it ranged from this group saying that they didn't say it'd fall when it would fall, when it did fall, but saying that it would fall, to others saying it wouldn't happen for a long time and they'd be able to sustain themselves through the end of the year. I made the decision. The buck stops with me. I took the consensus opinion. The consensus opinion was that, in fact, it would not occur, if it occurred, until later in the year. So it was my decision. And now my next is Stephanie Ramos, ABC.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 questions for you. The military has secured the airport, as you mentioned, but will you sign off on sending U.S. troops into Kabul to evacuate Americans who haven't been able to get to the airport safely?
We have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport. We've made an agreement with the Taliban thus far. They've allowed them to go through. It's in their interest for them to go through. So we know of no circumstance where American citizens are carrying an American passport are trying to get through to the airport. But we will do whatever needs to be done to see to it they get to the airport.
And one more, Mr. President. Last month, my colleague Martha Raddatz interviewed Abdul, an interpreter who was on the front lines with U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Overnight, we received a photo of Taliban militants coming to the door of his home, literally hunting him down. Thankfully, he was able to escape, but he is obviously still in mortal danger. What would be your message to Abdul, his wife, and his 3 young daughters?
We want you to be able to get to the airport. Contact us. We'll see whatever we can do to get you there. We've got to get you out. We are committed to deal with you, your wife, and your child to get all 3 of you out of Afghanistan. That's the commitment.
Thank you, sir.
Meredith Lee of PBS NewsHour.
You mentioned just now using every resource available for evacuations. Why haven't you ordered the military to expand the security perimeter around the Kabul airport? Do you have any plans to do so, given that will likely require more U.S. troops? And are you considering rescue operations to recover Americans and Afghan allies stuck behind Taliban checkpoints?
The answer is yes to the last question. We're considering every opportunity and every means by which we could get folks to the airport. That's number one. Number two, the reason why we have not gone out and started and set up a perimeter way outside the airport in Kabul is that it's likely to draw an awful lot of unintended consequences in terms of people who, in fact, are not part of the Taliban. We've been in constant contact with the Taliban leadership on the ground in Kabul, as well as the Taliban leadership at Dahou. And we've been coordinating what we were doing. That's why we were able, for example, how we got all of our embassy personnel out, how we got everyone out of the embassy safely. That was the distance. That's how we helped get the French out and out of their embassy. So the question remains, there will be judgments made on the ground by the military commanders at the moment, and I cannot second guess each of those judgments to be made. But the idea of, again, let me get back to the fundamental point I made at the outset. When the decision was made by me that, and it was made some time ago, and I ran for president saying I wanted to get us out of Afghanistan. One of the things that is a reality is people now say to me and to others, and many of you say it on air, that why did we have to move because no Americans are being attacked? Why did we withdraw those, why did we agree to withdraw 2,500 troops? No Americans are being attacked. As I said before, the reason they weren't being attacked was part of an agreement that Trump had made a year earlier. We will leave by May 1st, he said, as long as there's no attack on Americans in that year period. Number one. Number two, the Taliban was taking large swaths of the countryside, north and south. None of the major areas, none of the major points of the capitals of each of these provinces. But they were all over the country. And the idea that if I had said on May the 2nd or 3rd, we are not leaving, we are staying, does anybody truly believe that I would not have had to put in significantly more American forces, send your sons, your daughters, like my son was sent to Iraq, to maybe die? And for what? For what? So the only rational thing to do, in my view, was to set up and pre-position American forces for the purpose of evacuation, and the aircraft to pre-position those ahead of time so that we would be able to begin the process of evacuation of American citizens, SIVs, and others who helped us. The last point I'll make is this. Look, if we had decided 15 years ago to leave Afghanistan, it would have been really difficult. If we decided 5 years ago, if we continued the war for another decade and tried to leave, there's no way in which you'd be able to leave Afghanistan without there being some of what you're seeing now. But what we've done so far is we're able to get a large number of Americans out, all our personnel at the embassy out, and so on. And thank God, so far, knock on wood, we're in a different position. Scott Detrow, Scott, NPR.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to follow up on something you said a moment ago. You said that there's no circumstances where American citizens cannot get to the airport. That doesn't really square with the images we're seeing around the airport, with the reporting on the ground from our colleagues who are describing chaos and violence. Are you saying unequivocally that any American who wants to get to the airport is getting there and getting past the security barrier and to the planes where they want to go?
I thought the question was, how can they get through to the airport outside the airport? And the answer is, to the best of our knowledge, the Taliban checkpoints, they are letting through people showing American passports. Now, that's a different question when they get in the rush and crowd of all the folks just outside the wall near the airport. That's why we had to, I guess, was it yesterday or the day before, we went over the wall and brought in, how many? 169 Americans. So it is a process to try to figure out how we deal with the mad rush of non-Americans, those who didn't help, those who are not on the priority list, just any Afghan to be able to get out of the country. And so my guess is that no matter what, under what circumstances there's not a whole lot of Afghanis, there's a whole lot of Afghanis that just as soon come to America, whether they're any involvement with the United States in the past at all, rather than stay under Taliban rule or any rule. So what I was saying is that we have an agreement that they will let pass through the checkpoints that the Taliban control, put Americans through.
But given this, given the negotiations with the Taliban, the scenes that we're seeing, can you just fully explain why the plan wasn't to go ahead with these evacuations of both Americans and allies before the drawdowns began, before Bagram was closed, looking back several months? Because whether it was now or several months from now, there seems to be a broad consensus that the Taliban would make these gains and these would be needed at some point.
Well, yeah, at some point. But the point was that although we were in contact with the Taliban and Doha for this whole period of time, at some point wasn't expected to be the total demise of the Afghan National Force, which was 300 persons. Let's assume the Afghan National Force had continued to fight and they were surrounding Kabul. Be a very different story. Very different story. But the overwhelming consensus was that they were not going to collapse. The Afghan forces, they were not going to leave. They were not going to just abandon and then put down their arms and take off. So that's what happened. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Why do you continue to trust the Taliban, Mr. President?
In the first time since the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban, you saw Secretary Blinken, Vice President Kamala Harris standing at the sides of President Joe Biden there at the White House. Biden saying to Americans still in Afghanistan, "We will get you home," saying the past week has been heartbreaking. Any American who wants to come home, we will get you home. I cannot promise, he said, what the final outcome will be. Went on to claim that Al-Qaeda is not gone from Afghanistan. I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world. I have seen the exact opposite. Jennifer Griffin is live right now at the Pentagon. Jennifer, that is certainly not what we've seen. In fact, the EU foreign chief calls the fall of Kabul a catastrophe, criticized the president for withdrawing U.S. troops. French parliamentarian Nathalie Loiseau, we thought America was back. You have German Chancellor Angela Merkel's center-right Union bloc questioning his motives, calling for accountability on behalf of the United States, saying the U.S. bears the main responsibility for the current situation. How are we digesting what we just heard?
Well, Sandra, I'm having a hard time digesting what we heard because I couldn't fact check it fast enough in real time because there were so many misrepresentations of what is happening on the ground. To hear the president talk about still having an over-the-horizon capability to see what is happening with the remnants of Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, the Khorasan group, and even the Taliban, that would have required partners on the ground. And what we've seen in recent days is that those partners on the ground have been abandoned. They're in hiding. They're fearing for their lives. They've fled the country. We don't have partners. We don't have eyes and ears. The whole reason that U.S. military cannot leave the airport to go and rescue any Americans who are out in Kabul when British and French special forces can do so is that they don't have any partners left. They don't have partners there who can help them safely navigate. So I don't see how you can say that with a straight face, that they're going to be over the horizon capabilities to see the terror threat in Afghanistan when this is all said and done. The damage done to international relations, international standing, we heard, as you said, from international leaders around the world that NATO allies were gobsmacked at the sudden announcement and withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. And I remember at the time when shortly after the Biden administration took over and the Secretary Blinken went over to tell NATO allies that, it wasn't a discussion with allies, it was, we're leaving. And that left other countries, and I remember when the Italians, the French, had to make quick decisions to get their people out, and they were shuttering their embassies over the summer. There's still no good explanation for why the SIV process was going so slowly. That was a State Department run effort, and we have documented the SIV issue for 4 years, and there has been slow rolling and ridiculous amounts of paperwork and 14 steps only in the last 24 hours. The reason you're seeing 6,000 people be flown out on U.S. C-17 planes is because they stopped asking for all those paperworks, and they're now flying refugees out. So the reason you see a bottleneck in 9 hours where U.S. C-17s haven't been able to take off from Kabul and get any more Afghans out of Afghanistan is because there are no third-party countries willing to allow U.S. flights to land, and those are not SIVs on board those planes. They're refugees, and they are not being given permission by this White House to come straight to the United States. So this is a alternate reality that was just presented from the White House, and I just feel a great deal of empathy, not only for the people of Afghanistan, but for our poor Marines and 82nd Airborne who have been sent back into the airport after having been pulled out unceremoniously, having to lift those babies over the walls and see the scenes of humanitarian disaster that were anticipated. There were discussions about this in the Situation Room, that this is what would happen if the U.S. pulled out, and President Biden took the decision anyway.
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. I know you're going to stand by with us, continuing coverage now. Jennifer, thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer, thank you. Good stuff on that. Back now to retired four-star General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. I mean, you hear from Jennifer Griffin there, sir, and it's amazing. She has been to Afghanistan since 1993, covered the Pentagon for 20 years, lived in the Middle East for 10 years. She knows the area, knows the regions, knows what's going on. And she said, couldn't fact check it fast enough in real time because there were so many misstatements made by the president. I want to know if we have this soundbite keyed up, because the president said something that you might have found a little bit unbelievable, where he said there's been no criticism of our credibility from our allies. This is about American leading the world, and our allies agree with us. Listen to this.
I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world. I've spoken with our NATO allies. We've spoken with NATO allies, the Secretary of State. Our National Security Advisor has been in contact with his counterparts throughout the world and our allies, as has the General, or excuse me, I keep calling him General, but my Secretary of Defense. The fact of the matter is, I have not seen that. Matter of fact, the exact opposite I've got. The exact opposite thing is we're acting with dispatch. We're acting, committing to what we said we would do.
And Sanders just laid out, General, all of the foreign leaders who have criticized us. Does he really believe this thing has drawn praise from around the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a stunning revelation. This is the President of the United States, folks. I mean, he's surrounded by people who have access to global information. There's a presidential daily briefing. It's not just about intelligence. It's about other things that are happening that are impacting the United States. And certainly it's a very unusual thing for our NATO allies to openly criticize the President of the United States for his actions in Afghanistan, and to have that as universal criticism. And you're telling me that no one has told the President of the United States that? I mean, that's pretty outrageous. Secondly, he is standing up there and looking us in the face and telling us there's no Al-Qaeda left in Afghanistan. Now, that's just not factual. The fact is, even in open source UN reporting, the United Nations has reported that the Taliban is in 15 different provinces inside of Afghanistan. That's the reality. And we got to deal with that reality. I'm stunned that he still is holding to that kind of information. And this over-the-horizon thing, we're going to track the development of international terrorism inside of Afghanistan from over the horizon. Remember what has happened here. We had a huge intelligence robust capability that we wanted to keep in place. It's publicly disclosed that we had a significant CIA presence on the ground, whose #1 task was to stay focused on the Al-Qaeda. After all, it's from their capability that we went on to kill Osama bin Laden, who's across the border in Pakistan. So that is gone. How do we track and maintain eyes and ears of what is happening with international terrorists, to include the Al-Qaeda, inside of Afghanistan, when we've lost the eyes and ears of our intel community on the ground, when we lost the eyes and ears of the Afghan people, when we've lost the eyes and ears of all the Afghan troops that used to be out there reporting what is going on in their neighborhood? This is wishful thinking to a fault. And to continue to use that term, it gives us a false impression that we're going to be able to effectively track the Al-Qaeda and radical Islamists and then intervene militarily, as we have done over the past 20 years, to keep these folks down. I'm stunned by some of these comments. It makes no sense whatsoever in terms of what reality is.
As Jennifer Griffin just said, it appears he's living in an alternate reality. To your point about what he said, Biden did claim, his own words, Al-Qaeda is now gone in Afghanistan. General Keane, before he spoke, you said you wanted to hear a very specific mission as to how we are going to get those Americans home. Here is what he said on that, his promise. Listen.
But let me be clear. Any American who wants to come home, we will get you home. Make no mistake, this evacuation mission is dangerous. It involves risks to our armed forces, and it's being conducted under difficult circumstances.
But went on to say we still don't have an exact number of Americans there. We know the Pentagon said they didn't know. We know the State Department didn't have an exact number. And Joe Biden just said we want to get a strong number as to exactly how many people are there, how many American citizens are there. Did he show you any change in action? Or was this just words? Rick Grinnell just tweeted out, no personnel adjustments. The White House thinks everything went great. In the wake of how this is all unfolded, did you think that perhaps there should have been some sort of announced change in leadership even from the White House?
Well, I do take solace in the sense that he said we'll mobilize all resources to accomplish this mission. Totally agree with that. However, that does seem to be a little out of line with what Secretary Austin was saying the other day when he said, I don't have the resources necessary to go outside the gate to facilitate movement of people through all the Taliban checkpoints. And what he was referring to there, I take it he doesn't have the resources, but he doesn't have permission. I don't think we've done anything to alleviate that. And the president, I don't think he truly gets it, that yes, American citizens, not all, but most, are transiting through Taliban checkpoints with passport in hand. But most, and very few of the Afghans are getting through those checkpoints, even though they have documentation in hand which justifies their exit from the Kabul airport and to a destination. That is what is being constipated. And it's stopped, and he's clueless that we're never going to be able to accomplish the mission that he has given himself, which is to extract all of our Afghan partners. I think what he's really saying to us, we're going to do the best that we can. And I don't feel that same resolve and determination to get this done, all available resources, regardless of how long it takes. And he should be out there telling his military, guys, get out there and figure out what we need to do to break through these checkpoints. We'll get the Taliban involved in it, but if they don't cooperate, I need you to get our people through those checkpoints and find alternate places to pick them up, where they don't all have to come immediately to the airport, to make this a little bit easier on everybody.
Yeah. General Keane, stand by if you will, sir. Thank you. We've got great insight from you. Sandra?
All right. Thanks, General. Our Fox News team has been waiting on all this, everything Afghanistan, not just recently, but for some of them since the very beginning of this war over 20 years ago. Those decades of experience can help us all understand how this crisis is playing out in this moment. Of course, Jennifer Griffin still with us, along with us, Benjamin Hall, Steve Harrigan, Aisha Hasni. Thanks to all of you for your coverage of this war and now this crisis. Steve Harrigan, to you first on what we just heard from the president.
I'm scared of a couple of things. I'm scared, first of all, as to what could happen next, because we're talking about several thousand potential hostages, which the Taliban will know how to use to get as much as they want. This could go very bad very soon. The other thing that really scares me is just how wrong they were and how surprised they were about the army that they built, the Afghan National Army. I remember going to a graduation training class of Afghan soldiers, and they all spun their diplomas around because they didn't know which letters were up. None of them could read after graduation. Anyone who's been around Afghan national government soldiers know that you have to do a mission before payday, because when payday comes, they all disappear. That if they're supposed to work with the U.S. troops, they might be an hour late, they might be days late. Anyone who's been on the ground in Afghanistan knows about this force. How did he and his Rhodes Scholar advisors be completely fooled by this?
Yeah, it's a good point. And Benjamin Hall, to you, when you listen to the president, and we talked about this earlier, when he actually comes out and he says, listen, we believe that our allies think that, we did a good job on this, and we have kind of read the reaction from the EU leader calling it a catastrophe and so on. You have a better kind of concept of what is happening and what the feeling is around the rest of the world. Were you surprised by that statement, Benjamin?
It's absolutely devoid of reality, Trace. It's remarkable. Just a couple of days ago, we watched MPs in the Parliament here stand up, one after the other, and categorically say they would not have left Afghanistan. They were left in the dark about this departure, and they were scrambling to keep up. And the bigger question now from so many of them is, what does the future of NATO look like? A lot of them are even laughing. They're saying President Biden campaigned on the idea that America is back like it's disappeared, and they're saying this is the nail in the coffin. How can we possibly trust an American alliance if we have to fight one in the future against China perhaps, if this is how they're going to treat us? And he said very clearly today, we went in as a coalition, a NATO coalition, we are leaving as a NATO coalition. That is simply not true, and the same has been said across European nations. We've heard it from the Germans and the French. In fact, the head of Germany's CDU party, Merkel's successor, has said this is the death knell for NATO. I mean, it is remarkable to hear him say that. And frankly, it's bizarre, because not only does it give no solace to allies in the West, it gives zero solace to the allies in Afghanistan right now. For the tens of thousands of Afghans who have worked with us in the past, many of whom we've spoken to in the last few days, they will still be cowering in their houses, terrified that knock on the door is coming their way, with no idea how to get help. And the idea that the French and the British are going outside the wire, bringing people in, and the US isn't, that's going to be a huge affront to them. President Biden just there said that they were giving overhead support to the French so they could go into Kabul and pull people out, but they weren't doing so because they thought it might lead to an escalation. The Taliban clearly are not terribly afraid of President Biden right now. He's more afraid of them attacking him. And at the moment, they are reliant entirely, the US is reliant entirely on Taliban goodwill for allowing people to get inside that airport. It is frankly baffling right now, Trace.
Yeah.
Benjamin, thank you for your perspective on that. Aisha Hasni, your thoughts on what we just heard?
A couple of things I just want to add on to what Benjamin Hall said about, the Taliban sort of scaring everyone around the world, including, I would say, I want to bring in, of course, what's going on in Pakistan. The Pakistani prime minister essentially saying we don't want to be a part of this war anymore. And he pretty squarely laid the blame on the U.S. for all the suicide bombings that have been going off in Pakistan by the Pakistani Taliban because of their involvement with the U.S. government in fighting the war on terror. But I also want to bring up, I don't know if anyone noticed that there was this question that multiple reporters kept asking in different ways of the president that he never quite answered. It was about, obviously you're going to have U.S. citizens that will be able to show their passport, their blue passport at these checkpoints and be able to get through. But what about the allies, the translators, the linguists, the people who have been helping U.S. forces on the ground? How are they supposed to get to the airport? Because I have in my hands right now documents for a translator trapped in Kabul in a house right now, hiding out
with his wife and his 4 children, absolutely terrified. He can't leave the house. He hasn't gotten approval yet from the U.S. government to come to the airport, and he's wondering how he's even going to make it to the airport because of these Afghani Taliban checkpoints. And then you think about the people who are even further away from Kabul right now, like in Kandahar. That is 300 miles away from Kabul. General
Keane was making that point. Aisha, to your point, our team has this, we can roll the tape on exactly what you're saying. When he was pressed on those that are getting blocked heading to the airport, here's how he responded. Okay. All right. I can tell you, he said, we have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport. That's remarkable when you know there are many stories like that out there that you just shared.
It's terrifying because I have friends that have families on the ground, in the ground right now, and they're telling their family members, please reach out to anyone that you know at the U.S. Embassy. They're asking me for email addresses, contact numbers to reach out to anyone at the embassy. They have no way of contacting the U.S. government on the ground right now because there is so much chaos. And what they're looking for is just the green light. They don't want to go out of their homes until they have the green light to be able to travel.
Aisha, we're going to tee it
airport.
up. Here's how he defended it. SOT 14.
We're in constant contact with the Taliban, working to ensure civilians have safe passage to the airport. We're particularly focused on our engagements on making sure every American who wants to leave can get to the airport. Where we have been seeing challenges with Americans, for Americans, we have thus far been able to resolve them. We've made clear to the Taliban that any attack on our forces or disruption of our operations at the airport will be met with swift and forceful response.
Aisha.
Yeah, again, just specifically, he's talking about American citizens, and while that is incredible and amazing to hear, what about the people that have helped Americans on the ground? There are hundreds of them all over the place. I know my friends have family members who are translators and linguists, and they are trapped. Essentially, they cannot leave until they get that green light from the U.S. Embassy on the ground to make it to the airport. And then keep in mind, you know, in my hands, all these documents, this is what they'll be carrying with them. And this is exactly what the Taliban are looking for, documents that link them to the U.S. government, and that is what they're afraid of.
I should stand by. Jennifer Griffin, about 10 minutes ago, the best Pentagon reporter in the business, said on our air that she couldn't fact check the president's speech fast enough. That, of course, would be you. We gave you a few minutes. Did you come up with anything else, Jennifer, that you thought might have been a little unusual for the president to include in this speech?
Well, I think what struck me, Trace, and I just want to mention that my relationship to Afghanistan and Pakistan goes back to 1993 when I lived in Islamabad and began going to Afghanistan. And what the president said today is that the U.S. has no national interest in Afghanistan. And what I remembered is that is what successive American presidents, President Bush, H.W. Bush, said after the Soviets pulled out and after the U.S. had provided Stinger missiles to the Mujahideen, weapons that we didn't get back and which created the seeds for Al-Qaeda. What is shocking to me is how little understanding of that region after 20 years of war, that leaving a vacuum in Afghanistan. President Biden said we have no U.S. national interest in Afghanistan. Well, when we tried to pull out of the region, and when I was a young reporter, I was in my 20s, living in Islamabad, one of just a handful of reporters going back and forth to Afghanistan, listening to visiting intelligence officers from Washington coming through, State Department officials telling us that the Taliban were actually a good idea because they would come and bring peace and calm to Afghanistan after the civil war that broke out when the Soviets pulled out. Well, I can tell you, you fast forward to a few weeks from now, a few months from now, we already see signs that the Afghans are starting to, the resistance will start to build with groups in the Panjshir Valley, descendants of Ahmad Shah Massoud and other leaders, warlords that go back to that post-Soviet period and civil war. They are going to come back. There will be a civil war in Afghanistan, and U.S. military commanders knew it. They told the White House about it, and the president was willing to leave a civil war behind in Afghanistan, saying that there's no U.S. national interest. But we know what happened in Iraq when the U.S. pulled out, when President Biden was Vice President Biden, and the same national security team told us that they could pull out of Iraq with no consequences. 3 years later, U.S. troops were sent in to fight ISIS. So this notion that there's no U.S. national interest in Afghanistan is really a little hard to stomach from my perch after seeing that the same things were said back in 1993 to 95 before the Taliban came and gave bases to al-Qaeda and bin Laden. Just remember that without intelligence bases in Afghanistan, without partners in Afghanistan, we couldn't carry out the mission against bin Laden that U.S. troops did 10 years ago. All of those things, we've just gone dark in a part of the world that is very dark. And I can tell you, it is like Groundhog Day listening to the words coming out of the White House about how the U.S. does not have a national interest in that region.
Great context and perspective. Jennifer Griffin, stand by.
Steve Harrigan, you have covered many terrorist attacks over the years. The president was just asked about the threat now of terror and the threat that we face here in the homeland, and he said this, listen.
The threat from terrorism has metastasized. There's a greater danger from ISIS and al-Qaeda and all these affiliates in other countries by far than there is from Afghanistan. And we're going to retain an over-the-horizon capability.
Because as the Taliban takes over Afghanistan, we do wonder what the threat is here at home.
I do think this story could get a lot worse, and what I'm interested in is if that happens, how much attention, how important is that going to be to Americans? Often, I've seen it before, when a country is beaten in a war, when a country is humiliated, there are huge repercussions. This story has happened before. The Soviets in 1989 had to leave with their tail between their legs, although they did it in an orderly parade. After 10 years in Afghanistan, they lost, their empire was defeated, and it really had a huge effect. Many people think it helped bring down the Soviet Union. It really broke trust in government. How angry, how upset are people going to be about this? What are the implications here domestically, especially if this goes south? I try and look for ways of how this can be solved, and I just see it getting worse, much worse, every direction.
You know, Steve Harrigan, I go back to looking at you back in 2001, and you were the only correspondent out there. You had a photographer. There was one light in the middle of a field, and that's the only coverage that was coming out of Afghanistan for a while. You were working for somebody else at the time, and I remember the president of this network said, get that guy, work him for us, and you became a member of Fox News Channel, an invaluable one. But Steve, when you hear the president of the United States now saying that they are really trusting the Taliban, they literally are trusting the Taliban to play by the rules during this evacuation of Americans and our Afghan partners, what do you think about that?
You know, that's just patently absurd, I think, to anyone who's dealt with them. And you're pointing back to those days. It's been a real strange vision for me to see this happen so quickly when the Taliban took over so many cities so quickly, because it was almost like the exact reverse of 2001. The Northern Alliance takes this city, this city, this city, Kunduz, Mazar. The Taliban has just flipped the script. You know, these are not people who fight to the last man. And some people say, oh, you know, they're cowards, but they've defeated the U.S., they've defeated the Soviet Empire, they've defeated the British Empire. This is a kind of strategy of melting back into the public, waiting your chance, developing weapons like IEDs, making them more and more powerful, evolving and waiting. And they've come back and defeated 3 major empires in the last 200 years.
Great. Yeah.
Steve, thank you for that. And especially that look back as well. Benjamin Hall's been reporting very recently from Afghanistan. We were also showing images of you, video of you, reporting on the ground there. And we think about what is happening there right now in this moment. With such growing fear for the people there, you have seen a great transition over the years of your reporting on the ground there as well.
Yeah, and I wonder if the producers might just start rolling this clip from the beginning with the sound, because this was in November. And one of the things which I heard back then, which has been so hotly debated, is whether or not there was intelligence that Kabul would fall so quickly. This is what we reported last November. Take a listen. And the Taliban are in control. Night after night, they launch attacks on police checkpoints, and they take over districts like this. They are knocking on Kabul. Districts like this are taken over by the Taliban at night. When night falls, they come in, they put up roadblocks, they arrest and kill people who work for the government. The people who work in night after night, they launch attacks on police checkpoints.
Well,
and
there you go. I mean, back in November, we were speaking to people and we were going out around Kabul in some parts, and they were telling us then that at night time, the Taliban came and took over parts of Kabul. They were going out looking for people who work for the Afghan government and killing them. You know, the idea that there wasn't intelligence, that the Taliban were inside Kabul or ready to take it over is ridiculous. And they had kill lists that people were worried about. They knew who was working for the Americans back then, and they were going out and systematically targeting them. And outside Kabul, when we were speaking to people around it, they also said, at night time, this area is all controlled by the Taliban. We have no control here. And so to hear the president say time and time again, well, the intelligence was a bit vague, we didn't think it would fall as quickly. Well, we were reporting this back in November, that it was absolutely ready to fall. I will add an interesting point, which is that a lot of the people we spoke to outside of the city, some of them, quite a few of them, said to us, you know what, after 20 years, we would actually welcome the Taliban back into our villages, because in some of these rural areas where war had been going on for so long, where Afghan National Army had been fighting the Taliban and there was killing, there were some people who said, you know what, bring in the Taliban as long as it brings peace and we accept the harsh rule of reality of that world. Of course, it's totally different in these cities. A city of 6 million like Kabul, well, those are people who have never experienced anything but freedom, and they're the ones who today will be coming to terms with a whole new reality. And to hear President Biden saying, oh, we are going to push for and think about the human rights and the liberty of women, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that's the case in Afghanistan, how are you going to do that? That is absolutely impossible to check. Unless, he said, except for commitments from the Taliban is what we're going to do. We're going to get commitments from the Taliban. It's not going to happen.
That's a very fair point. Aisha Hosni, to you, as Benjamin's point is made very well there, he has the video going back to November of 2020. We knew the intel reports were coming in April that the Taliban was moving a lot faster than anybody imagined. And then again, we have this dissent, the State Department through this private dissent line where, the State Department, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was warned the Taliban is moving faster. And today the president was asked about that. And he said, well, we get all kinds of different reaction, but the consensus was that they were not going to be able to take over Kabul that fast. You could have called your friends in the country and they would have told you the scenario.
It really does boggle my mind how often we underestimate, the Taliban and what they're capable of and how organized they are. And I can tell you right now, just talking with my Afghani friends, there is so much hopelessness because they have lived this reality before 20 years ago. They know what's in store for them if they cannot get out. And they feel like they have only a very small window of opportunity that is closing. They feel like in the next 10 days, the American forces will be gone and their chance of leaving the country will also be gone. And I just want to highlight one thing I said yesterday as well. This is not just an Afghanistan problem. To think that the Taliban will somehow just keep within their borders and do what they want to do within their borders is unrealistic. The Pakistani Taliban has caused chaos in my home country of Pakistan. I was there in 2016 when the Pakistani Taliban set off a bomb on Easter Sunday in a park next to my grandmother's home. It is traumatizing to me. I remember not knowing for hours, for almost half a day, if my mom or my dad were alive or dead. I had no idea. I couldn't reach them. And I just find it very hard to understand how we can sit here and think that the Taliban will somehow just stay within their borders.
Jennifer Griffin, at the Pentagon, you go back to what we just heard right now from the president as the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, stood at his side along with Vice President Kamala Harris. First time we've seen them all together since this withdrawal began and since the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. We did not hear from Blinken. The president turned around, sort of referenced him a couple times. He did not jump in, and they certainly did not take questions. The president spoke for 10 minutes. He took questions for 18. The White House has since called a lid. That's it for the day. It doesn't look like we will be seeing from him or hearing from him. Something else that we did not hear from him, either in the questions or in the speech, was about the Taliban members now armed to the teeth.
with U.S. weaponry. The helicopters that they have now, that they have seized on the ground there, the sniper rifles, the Humvees, the trucks, as you say, the smaller weapons that they have in their possession from the U.S. military. I didn't hear anything about that from the president just a short time ago, and any plan to try to seize those or get them back.
I mean, it's really impossible, Martha. Excuse me, Sandra. We are looking at images of the Taliban. They are holding American M16 rifles that we have basically resupplied the Taliban, which had 70,000 members a few weeks ago, and now they're flooded with $85 billion of American weaponry, and not just small arms. Small arms you can get anywhere, but it's the advanced communications, the equipment that you can use to move around the battlefield. That's something Russia and China would love to get their hands on. There are advanced weapons. You have warplanes that were left behind. You have so much.
Military drones?
It's not possible for the U.S. to go in and shoot every person who's holding an M16. We have just flooded this country with weaponry. And again, if you think that's not going to blow back and that the U.S. doesn't have a national interest in Afghanistan and Pakistan, I also want to follow up on something that Aisha said about Pakistan. Let's not forget that where the Taliban was formed. The Taliban was formed, and I was living in Islamabad at the time, by the Interior Minister of Pakistan. The ISI, the Intelligence Service of Pakistan, has been funding the Taliban for the entire 20 years of the war, and we have been able to do nothing to stop it as the American government. We almost gave up on diplomacy with Pakistan after the bin Laden raid. We have, if you look at the Haqqani group, which is the strongest Taliban commanders, are all from Pakistan. And so we did not lay the groundwork for pulling out of Afghanistan. We did not involve the Pakistanis. We did not get assurances. All that we did, and this started under the Trump administration, the elevation and legitimization of the Taliban leadership. We asked Pakistan in 2018, we pressured them to release Mullah Baradar from a prison in Karachi so that Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad could negotiate with him a peace deal, if you will, in Doha, Qatar. Mullah Baradar was flown back and will be coming into Kabul in the coming days. It will look like the Ayatollah returning to Tehran. We have left a vacuum, and we do not know where this will end. But I can tell you this. The Taliban are not going to keep their word. The Taliban cannot be relied on. And I fear for every woman and child in that country, because it will be a reign of terror in the coming years.
Jennifer Griffin, Benjamin Hall, Steve Harrigan, Aisha Hasni, we thank all four of you for joining us. An incredible look and perspective from all of you. Thank you.
Best of the business. Great stuff. Thank you all. Let's go back to Adam Bowler, who has twice traveled to the Middle East to negotiate with the Taliban face to face with its leaders. And Adam, I just want, first of all, you heard the president's speech. I want your reaction.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the American ethos is no person left behind. And that doesn't apply just to American citizens and our troops, but it applies to allies and people that stood up for us. And so one of the questions I ask from this is, it's good to have words and good to talk about how we're working with the G7 and other countries, but this is a crisis. And in the crisis, you take action. And you do what you need to do. And so one of the concerns I had just listening, there was a reporter that asked about a translator and the translator's wife and their 3 children. And the answer was, they should call us. Call us how? Do we have a 1-800-AMERICA number? I wasn't quite clear the answer. The answer should have been, this is our operational plan to get the U.S. citizens and our allies out. And so, one thing in a crisis, and let me use COVID as an example. In Operation Warp Speed, we threw out convention, and that's why we were successful. We ran something called Operation Airbridge, where we had hundreds and hundreds of FedEx and UPS planes airlifting PPE from Asia to the United States. That's not normal. So the key here is, why is it taking so long on the passport side? We've added 20 people from state on the passport. Well, last I checked, we're the United States of America. 20 people from state isn't a lot of people. What are we going to do now that, let's call a spade here. We bungled the execution of this. It is what it is. How are we getting out of it?
And he says he's going to get every American home. Still has no number how many are there, but he did say this about the Taliban, Adam, that the White House is in constant contact. Listen.
And the only country in the world capable of projecting this much power on the far side of the world with this degree of precision is the United States of America. We've already evacuated more than 18,000 people since July and approximately 13,000 since our military lift began on August the 14th.
So he said just then that they are in constant contact with the Taliban, working to ensure civilians have safe passage to the airport. Wanted to see what you thought about that and whether or not you believe that the messaging the Taliban is giving this White House is believable.
I don't believe it's believable because, look, I never trust a terrorist organization. At the end of the day, the Taliban is an army of militants. And so the way you negotiate with an army of militants, you can have discussions. But what's the force behind that? And what I'm concerned about is where is the belief that we will execute and back up if we're totally out of the country in 10 days? I don't see how that's working. So you can negotiate with a militant army if you have strength and you can execute on that. When they see what happened to Soleimani in Iran, they know what will happen if they don't execute with what you say. But that's my concern, is where is the backup behind our words?
I think it's a valid concern. Adam Bowler, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Adam.
you.
Let's bring in retired Marine bomb technician and Fox News contributor Joey Jones. I know you you have been joining the channel at length through this crisis. You just heard the president. What was your reaction?
You know, 11 years ago this month, I laid on a battlefield and I was bleeding out of 3 limbs. Both my legs were gone and I had a punctured lung. And in that moment, when I felt like I was probably going to die, I had no regrets and no worries. And my regrets were not there because I wasn't worried about if my sacrifice meant something. Men and women would go home alive. And I wasn't worried because I knew my body would make it home to my parents and they would be notified. And that they wouldn't sit around and worry for days and weeks at a time what happened to their son or how it happened. I didn't have to worry about that. The American flag went down on the U.S. Embassy on Sunday. It took the president 6 days to tell parents and sons and daughters and mothers and fathers that their loved ones, he would commit to bringing them home. We're not talking about Afghans. We're talking about U.S. citizens. It took the president of the United States 6 days to guarantee Americans that their family would come home and he would do what was necessary to bring them home. I couldn't imagine what a Marine or a soldier sitting on a plane about to go to Kabul right now, I couldn't imagine how they feel. They have no guarantee from this administration, one, that they'll be able to do their job, and two, if they do their job, that they'll come home or even their bodies will come home. Because we have an administration relying on negotiating with an organization that I saw take 12-year-old little boys and use them as cannon fodder to put IEDs and bombs in the ground. An organization that has never had a word to keep. An organization that terrorizes its own people and hands out justice by men standing in a circle stoning someone to death.
Yeah.
And we're negotiating and working with them to ensure the safety of our citizens.
And trusting them to help get our citizens to an airport that we now control.
From the inside out. We control with a cordon of Taliban around it. It's a dangerous situation, and the President of the United States lied to our press and ultimately to us today. And on multiple occasions, Jennifer Griffin did a great job pointing it out. The one I can tell you is to stand there and say that none of our allies are questioning our credibility. There's a compelling video circling the internet from the House of Commons in Great Britain. A man tells Joe Biden, an elected official or an official in Great Britain tells Joe Biden, if you haven't worn and fought for the colors, be careful questioning those that have. That's a heck of a statement right there.
Joey, he said
Joe Biden might want to take heed.
He said there's been no criticism, quite the opposite from our allies. He also said that there have been no Americans having difficulty getting to the Kabul airport, which is stunning as well. Just with the few, less than a minute or so that we have left in show here, Joey, how are the men and women you served alongside, how are they doing right now?
They're mad. They're mad and upset. They understand that their sacrifice meant something in the moment that it happened, but they're worried. Not about them, but about those that are still there. That's why they're mad and upset. For the soldiers and for the soldiers and Marines that are over there now, if they're given the opportunity, they will make us proud. I have no doubt in that whatsoever.
So important to say that, and so important to hear that. And
Joey
we
Jones.
have faith in our military each and every day.
Thank you so much, Joey Jones, for joining us. We appreciate your insight on that. And General Jack Keane has said many times, listen, this for 20 years, the fighting in Afghanistan kept us safe. The sacrifice was worth it because we stayed safe for those years, and it was very important for us to be there. The pullout, whole different story.
Special thank you to all our guests that have joined us, and especially our reporters, our amazing reporters with their firsthand stories covering Afghanistan over the years, over the decades.
They're the best in the business.
Great to be with you all. Thank you. And continuing coverage here on the Fox News Channel, I'm Sandra Smith.
I'm Trace Gallagher. The story with Martha McCallum starts right now.
Sandra and Trace, my thoughts exactly. What an outstanding Middle East team we have, and the coverage they've done over the years brings something to this story that I don't think you're going to find anywhere else. So our thanks to all of them. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum in New York as we continue our coverage right now on this story. We are about to get another update here. We're going to go to the Pentagon and the State Department. There were a lot of questions that were left unanswered, and according to some of our reporting, were answered incorrectly, not based in facts. So we hope there's going to be another go-round here in just a moment, and that we'll get some answers from the administration. We only had 17 minutes of Q&A with President Biden, so that's going to be extended right now with other members of the administration, and we're going to take you there live. Here's what President Biden had to say moments ago about his decision, firm decision, to fully withdraw our troops from Afghanistan.
What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with Al Qaeda gone? We went to Afghanistan for the express purpose of getting rid of Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, as well as getting Osama bin Laden, and we did.
So that seems like the perfect jumping off point to bring in Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been to Afghanistan many times as a former member of the Armed Services Committee, and he served in Afghanistan as an Air Force Reserve Colonel. Senator Graham, good to have you with us today. I thought that was an astonishing comment in many ways, just in terms of the reality of the situation. And I want to hear your reaction to that first, and then some other points that he made.
Well, number one, President Biden is clearly disconnected from the reality on the ground in Afghanistan. The UN issued a report just a month or two ago saying that Al Qaeda was in 15 provinces of Afghanistan. After this debacle, they're going to be everywhere. He also said, I'm going to hold him to his word that we're going to get all the Americans out and all the Afghans out. He said that, but look what's going on the ground. The State Department has issued a statement today. You travel at your own peril. We can't guarantee your safety, and the gates at the Kabul airport may close at any minute. So the State Department is telling people on the ground, you're on your own, and the President of the United States is promising to get you out. There is no plan. President Biden is clearly overwhelmed by the situation, and I think he's in denial about what's going on, but because Al Qaeda is there, and there's clearly no plan. If there were a plan, do you think a mother would be handing their baby over the wall to a Marine?
No, because they know the reality, and they understand that the Taliban has not changed its stripes, and that they made a deal. They've waited us out. They might even be cooperative in some ways in terms of letting people leave, although we've seen them also very violent at times when they see fit. You know, I want to just talk about the Afghani people and the commitment that you talked about that the president made there, right? Because he said, we will get you home. That was a clear message to Americans. But when he was pressed a little bit on the Afghans who helped us, he sort of left, I think, some doors open to maybe not help all of those people, right? So he was asked, will you stay past the August 31st deadline? Because we all know that, you know, to get thousands and thousands of people out in the next 10 days is going to be tricky. He said, I think we can get the Afghans out in time. And then he said, but we'll see about the deadline. We'll see. Then, just one more point I want to put out there on the table for you. He said, there's a whole lot of Afghani citizens, whether they helped us or not, that want to come to America. So, in essence, we can't let them all come here, which I think is very interesting, and I think people will also have echoes of the southern border in their head when they listen to that statement as well. Senator, your thoughts?
Yeah, okay, so let's unpack that. I think you brought up a couple of really good points. Number one, how do you get to Kabul if you're an American citizen? And he says there's no evidence that the Taliban has been impeding people from leaving. Watch television. Do they not have a TV at the White House? How many interviews have been on Fox about people trapped and can't get to the airport? And when they get to the airport, they're turned back. So there is no plan in place to get you from where you're at to Kabul airport. The State Department says you travel at your own peril. So when the president tells us he's committed to getting American citizens out, there's no plan, and he refuses to allow the military to leave the airport. The only way in hell we're going to get our people out is for the President of the United States to tell the military, use the full force and might of the U.S. military to get every American out and all those who fought along our side. Unless the president gives that order, we're going to leave thousands of people behind, and if we do, President Biden should be impeached for dereliction of duty. And the Taliban, I fear, have given us an ultimatum. There's something said today that most people miss. The Taliban said, we're going to form our government August 31st. To me, that is code saying that come August 31st, we're going to take over Afghanistan and tell you to leave. And the question for President Biden, are you going to let the Taliban give you an ultimatum? Because if you don't have everybody out by August 31st, are you going to tell the Taliban we're going to stay until we do? Stay tuned.
So he, once again, he sort of stepped up to the issue that you just talked about, Senator Graham, where he said, well, they can use every resource necessary, right? And we heard from General Austin, Lloyd Austin, who the president, just as an aside point, would point out, he refers to him as a general, did not say his name, so he's done that before, which is just a side point. He talked about why he couldn't let them go back to the perimeter, why they can't push out the perimeter, as we've seen other countries do to lift people out. Listen to this soundbite, then I want to get your thought on the other side. Can we play that soundbite? This is President Biden on why the troops are not going beyond the airport. Can we play that?
The reason why we have not gone out and started and set up a perimeter way outside the airport in Kabul is that it's likely to draw an awful lot of unintended consequences in terms of people who in fact are not part of the Taliban.
Quick thought on that, Senator, and then we're going to go to the Pentagon.
Yeah, I think what it means is that we're not going to fight to get our people out. If the Taliban tell us we can't go beyond the airport, we won't. Britain and France are going beyond the airport, but here's the point. What President Biden is saying to the American people is misleading. How could the State Department be telling people on the ground, we can't guarantee your safety. We may close the gate at any minute if there's a plan to get you out. How can the President of the United States not know that Al-Qaeda's in 15 provinces? President Biden is disconnected from reality at a time it's very dangerous for America.
Yeah, it raises a lot of questions about the leadership, about what's going on at the White House. I think these are fair questions to ask. Senator Graham, thank you very much. I want to take everyone to the Pentagon, where this briefing is underway. This is Major General Hank Taylor. Let's listen into this for a moment.
Earlier today, we have airlifted approximately 13,000 total evacuees during the operation. In total, since the end of July, the cumulative number of people moved out of Afghanistan is greater than 18,000. There are SIV applicants, at-risk Afghans who have worked alongside us throughout our time in Afghanistan, and other vulnerable Afghans, including women and children. Many of the flights leaving Kabul have stopped in designated safe havens and staging bases in Qatar and others, where State Department and military personnel are actively processing passengers for their follow-on flights to other destinations. We did pause flights earlier today leaving Kabul while we adjusted resources and personnel to ensure a temporary capacity issue at one of our stopover locations, although flight operations have resumed. And U.S. military flights to Qatar and other locations are departing Kabul as we speak right now. We're looking at additional locations for these initial flights to land. We're grateful for our allies, including Germany, where flights will land today, who are cooperating with us in this global effort. Aircraft availability is not an issue. We intend to maximize each plane's capacity. We're prioritizing the evacuation of people above all else, and we're focused on doing this as safely as possible with a great sense of urgency. We have not experienced any hostile acts since my last update. The troops on the ground are steadfast in an extremely dynamic environment. We see a tremendous amount of discipline, humanity, and professionalism in their mission. We continue to assess the operating environment and will aggressively address any threat to the mission. The safety and security of American citizens and service members, our partners who remain in Kabul alongside us, and the Afghan people is absolutely our top priority. I want to reinforce that we are focused on the mission of this great national importance. The massive effort is the result of teamwork and the tireless commitment of U.S. military to supporting the U.S. government around the world. Mr. Crew.
Thank you, General. Okay, Bob, there you are.
Hey, John.
Not your normal seat.
Thank you. President Biden, in his remarks earlier today, made a reference to having, I forget what word he used, but essentially rescued 169 Americans outside, beyond the perimeter, I believe he said. Can you explain what that was, how that happened, what happened?
Yeah, he's referring to a small number of people that our troops, they were very close to the perimeter, the perimeter of the airport, very close. And in a short amount of time, with a short amount of distance, some of our troops were able to go out there and retrieve them and bring them in.
It's on foot, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's 169 Americans, or do you know the breakdown?
I don't have the breakdown of of everybody.
And then a related question would be, has there been any further consideration to going further beyond the perimeter to do that?
Well, you heard the president today say that he wants to do whatever is going to be necessary to rescue Americans and our Afghan partners in need. I'm not going to speculate one way or another about potential future operations. The main focus is on security at the airport and making sure that, as the general said, that air operations resume and continue as unimpeded as possible. But clearly, we will be prepared and postured if we had to do something additional. But I won't speculate right now. Court?
Did the U.S. troops have to go through any Taliban checkpoints to go and get the Americans? And then, can you, General, can you talk a little bit more about this flight pause? How long did it last? And can you say when it started, when it stopped?
It was early this morning. It lasted about 6 to 7 hours, and it was allowed to ensure that flights at our intermediate staging bases could receive more personnel, and that has been cleaned up as flights have departed there. It has allowed us now to continue with those that are ready to fly on Kabul to leave.
This was Qatar, right? There was a backlog. Were there any other locations that had a backlog, or that
not reported?
Just a quick follow-up.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have permission to fly Afghans from Kabul to the United States or only to a third country? And is that what the holdup was?
That was not what the holdup was. The sites at Qatar were just at capacity. There was just no room to flow in additional people. Now, Jen, for special immigrant visa applicants who are already in that process, they will be flown back to the United States, and you've seen that we've done this at Fort Lee. We've announced Fort McCoy and Fort Bliss will be able to receive additional SIV applicants. For those who aren't in the SIV applicant process, there's been no final determination about whether they will be able to come right back to the United States again or in what timetable. That's a whole different category that we'd be dealing with, essentially people that are not part of that, technically part of that process. So that's something we'll be working out with the State Department.
John, what is your current estimate for how many al-Qaeda are inside Afghanistan?
I haven't seen an estimate on that. I don't know that we have an exact estimate.
Military intelligence estimates about how many al-Qaeda remain in Afghanistan.
We know that Al Qaeda is a presence, as well as ISIS, in Afghanistan, and we've talked about that for quite some time. We do not believe it is exorbitantly high, but we don't have an exact figure for you. As I think you might understand, Jen, it's not like they carry identification cards and register somewhere. We don't have a perfect picture. And our ability, our intelligence gathering ability in Afghanistan isn't what it used to be because we aren't there with the same numbers that we used to be.
But the president just said that there is no Al Qaeda presence in Afghanistan. That does not seem to be correct.
What we don't think is that what we believe is that there isn't a presence that is significant enough to merit a threat to our homeland as there was back on 9/11 20 years ago.
The president also said there is no national security interest, no national interest in Afghanistan. I'm a little confused by that. Can you explain why there's no national interest in Afghanistan? Why did we have troops there for 20 years if there's no national interest in Afghanistan?
We had a significant interest in being in Afghanistan to our national security 20 years ago. You've heard the president talk about this. The goal was to defeat and decimate Al Qaeda, also to prevent Al Qaeda from launching attacks on the homeland from Afghanistan, and we did that. We did that and a whole heck of a lot more over the course of 20 years, and to include helping with social, political, economic, just progress in Afghanistan. The president decided that it was time to end this conflict, that there was really only two choices because of the May 1 deadline, either plus up, because after May 1st we would come under attack by the Taliban, and we hadn't since the Doha Agreement had been signed, or go ahead and complete the drawdown. And the decision was made to complete the drawdown. Now, obviously, we're still going to maintain an overwatch vigilance with respect to the counterterrorism threat emanating out of Afghanistan. And if we need to, we will take action to eliminate and defeat that threat.
And you just said that you don't have intelligence on the ground in Afghanistan anymore. How are you going to have Overwatch and you still have Al Qaeda in the country?
Jen, what I said was we don't have the degree of dexterity intelligence to be able to give you a head count, a nose count of exactly how many Al Qaeda fighters are in Afghanistan. Nobody's walking away from the fact that they aren't there, and we're certainly going to maintain as much vigilance as we can, absent a presence on the ground. The other thing I would say, Jen, is our intelligence capability. It's more difficult if you don't have boots on the ground. But we have come a long way since 9/11 in terms of the way we collect, process, analyze, and distribute intelligence information. A long way in the last 20 years. And while it's never perfect, we do believe that we will be able to have appropriate warning should there be that kind of level threat coming from Afghanistan towards the homeland. And we have also the capability in the region to deal with that.
Thank you.
Tara.
Thank you. The president also suggested that extending the perimeter outside of Al-Qaeda might put U.S. troops at too great of a risk, although it was not clear if he was meaning that the risk would be with the Taliban or with groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Can you talk about that risk, and is it because there was some sort of agreement with the Taliban that U.S. troops will not be on the streets of Kabul?
I don't think there was any agreement that we wouldn't be anywhere in particular. But risk is a big part of managing any mission, Tara. And you're absolutely right. There are other threats in Afghanistan and in Kabul than those that might be posed by the Taliban. And we have to be mindful of that. We talked yesterday about Overwatch flights that were flying over Kabul. That's to make sure that we're ready if we need to defend ourselves. I'm not going to get into potential future operations one way or the other. I'm not going to speculate about whether or when or under what conditions we might expand the security perimeter that we're working with. But the president is absolutely right. An expansion does incur extra risk, and you have to balance risk versus gain in every particular military operation you're conducting, and that will be no different for this one.
To follow up on Al Udeid, we're also seeing reports that there might be food, water, sanitation shortages for the evacuees that are there. Sure. And so I was just wondering, General Taylor, are you making plans to flow in more supplies?
Absolutely. So as understand that that requirement to increase that throughput is there. So to ensure that we have food, water, healthcare, and all those things, absolutely. Those are part of those other flights. The supplies are being in there to make sure that we can take care of that.
2 IEDs.
That's right.
Okay.
John, a follow-up on expanding the mission and the risk to Americans. Apparently, the Germans are sending helicopters out throughout Kabul to pick up their citizens and bring them to the airport. There are reports of the French doing something similar, getting their people out, commandos going in. So, why can't the Americans do that? Is it because it's too risky for that kind of operation?
The president, I think, was clear that we'll do whatever we have to do to rescue as many Americans as want to leave Afghanistan, and the secretary is not going to rule anything in or out in terms of what the possibilities might be there. I would also note, though, Tom, that though there have been sporadic reports of some Americans not being able to get through checkpoints, I fully admit that. By and large, what we've been seeing is that Americans are able to get through those checkpoints and are able to get onto the airfield. So we aren't seeing, we're not aware of indications that there is that big a need for that. But obviously, now we've built out extra capacity over the course of just the last couple of days. If there's a need to do something additional to what we're doing now to get Americans processed and on planes, the secretary is going to want to keep as many options open to him as available.
It sounds like what the president was saying today is he doesn't want to risk American lives to save Afghans who helped Americans for the past 20 years. That seems like the message.
I'm sorry.
The president doesn't want to risk American lives to go and save Afghans who helped Americans during the past 20 years. That was a message today, I heard.
I didn't hear it that same way, Tom. I mean, in fact, I think the president was very clear in his remarks that we know we have an obligation to the Afghans that have helped us over the last 20 years. And Tom, the numbers belie that impression. I mean, if you just look at the numbers of the general brief, 13,000 since August 14th, 18,000 total, the vast majority of that number are Afghans. So, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves.
Well, the numbers are all over the map, frankly. I mean, some are saying 35,000, others are saying 100,000, 200,000.
In terms of what's left to get.
Right.
Yeah, I couldn't give you be perfectly predictive about what that's going to look like, the total pool, because you also have to flow in families, and we are moving and have been moving a lot of family members. But I mean, just to give you an example, the general noted nearly 6,000 came out in the last 24 hours. 5,000 of them were Afghans. 5,000 were Afghans. So I just don't accept the premise that this administration and this government and our military is not prioritizing moving Afghan partners and people who have helped us out of the country. Just the numbers don't say that. Yeah, Barb.
Can we go back to the 169, please? I have several follow-up questions. First of all, the president said it was 169 Americans. You say Americans are having no trouble getting through checkpoints to the best of your knowledge, except for any anecdotes that may be out there.
Thank you.
My questions are this. First of all, what was the situation of these 169 Americans that required U.S. troops to go outside the perimeter and get them? Why these 169 Americans? When did this happen? How long did the mission last? Was it 169 Americans altogether? Did you feel you had safe passage from the Taliban? Tell us more about this.
I don't have that level of detail. General, do you have any context?
I'm sorry. U.S. troops went outside the wire at the airport to rescue 169 Americans, and that's what the president said. And neither of you have any additional information about
Barbara, I'm happy to take the questions that you've asked back and try to provide additional context. I do not have that level of tactical detail here today, but I'm happy to take those questions and I'm happy to go look and see if we can find answers for you on that. Absolutely. But as my understanding of what happened was they were really just outside the wall. It wasn't very far to go. It was in a relatively short period of time, and it wasn't a rescue so much as assisting them getting onto the field. So I think that's the context in which I understand the incident. Your questions are fair. I will go back and see if we can provide additional context.
Can you also tell us then, just for the record, have American troops in any other instance or circumstance gone outside the wire at the airport, gone into the city to get people? Have American troops at all left the airport to go get people? And you said you had extended capacity. So do you now, the Secretary said the other day, you didn't have the capacity to really go get Americans. So do you now have the capacity to do that? And is there any other circumstance in which you've done it?
I don't know of any other circumstance. And yes, since Wednesday, since the Secretary spoke to you, we have flown in, and you've heard the general update you literally every day. We have flown in additional capacity, additional forces. Security is in a more stable position at the airport. So if there would be a need to do something additional to help Americans or other people at risk that we need to get to the airfield, we would examine those options, tee them up, weigh the benefits versus the risks, and then offer up opportunities to the Secretary to make a recommendation, and we would go from there.
So now, just to make sure I understand what you're saying, for the first time, this many days into the operation, the U.S. military has the capability and capacity to go into Kabul and get Americans for the first time.
We have additional capacity now, as we have flown additional forces in. But as I said earlier, I'm not going to talk about potential future operations one way or the other. And every decision that is made has got to be weighed against the risks and the benefits of what you're doing. The other thing I'd say, Barb, is, as I mentioned to Tom, there hasn't been that demand signal now. Most Americans are they're getting through the checkpoints and they're getting on. I'm not suggesting that in every case it's gone unimpeded.
Why did you wait so many days to have that capacity?
We didn't wait so many days, Barb. We have been flowing in forces consistently over the course of the last week, and we have been nothing but transparent to you about what we've been flowing in. So again, we will obviously do whatever we can. And if there's a need to do this, and it's an operation that we can talk about, we'll talk about it. Okay? Yeah.
Defense Secretary Austin just now in a briefing call with House lawmakers said the reports Americans have been beaten by the Taliban in Kabul. Is the U.S. military under orders to stay at the airport and not go protect them?
I think we've been talking about this throughout the entire briefing. We're certainly mindful of these reports, and they're deeply troubling. And we have communicated to the Taliban that that's absolutely unacceptable, that we want free passage through their checkpoints for documented Americans. And by and large, that's happening. And as we've talked about before, the mission right now, as you and I are speaking, is to keep security at that airport sound and to keep air operations moving, even after this delay. I'm not going to speculate about any changes to that mission at this time. If there's a change and we feel like we need to execute that change, then we'll do it.
Does that require a conversation with the Taliban or coordination?
I'm not going to talk about potential future operations and what that would look like in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I haven't gone to phone yet. Tracy Wilkinson.
Hi, thank you. Just to follow up on my colleagues' questions, we have reports of American helicopters going out and picking up people from multiple locations, both Americans and Afghans. So I want to understand how that mission has changed, that you actually, despite what Generals Austin and Milley said yesterday, you are actually going out of the airport and picking up people. Can you elaborate on that?
I can't confirm those reports, Tracy, at this time. Yeah, Megan.
So I feel like we're kind of bifurcating the issue between Americans and Afghans. You've said Americans are not having any issues, and you've settled with the Taliban that they're not going to have any issues, but have you made that same negotiation over Afghans? Because that's where most of these reports are coming from, that Afghans,
Yes.
even credentialed, are not being allowed through.
We've seen those reports too, Megan, and we have made it clear to the Taliban that these Afghans with the proper credentials should be allowed through the checkpoint. And again, Megan, I certainly we recognize that there have been multiple cases of Afghans, even some credentialed Afghans, being assaulted and beaten and harassed. No question. But by and large, those Afghans who have the proper credentials, and we have made it clear to the Taliban what those credentials look like, what they are, by and large, they're getting through the checkpoint. We have not seen that become a major issue.
My other question is, now that the president has opened the door to possibly having some rescue missions into the city, are commanders on the ground now speaking with the Taliban about, letting those missions go off unobstructed?
Well, first, I just want to say those discussions with commanders and the Taliban haven't stopped, right? That's a continuous piece of what's been going on. So I think the question you asked is, are we talking to the Taliban to go out and rescue folks? Like Mr. Kirby said, that is not, those demands have not been brought to the commanders as of yet.
But the president has opened up that possibility, so it would stand to reason that commanders would start.
I think we all heard that. I think we all heard that same comment from the president today, to ensure that we use all the capability we have to meet the mission.
So as of now, they're not asking for that specifically, or planning for that.
That's correct. As of this point, you just said two things. You said planning and asking. As I always said, prudent military planning is always continuously happening. We are always forecasting for those type of things and planning for that. Requests, no, I can report that hasn't yet. We have not received those.
Yeah, Tony.
A couple of questions. One of the communications with the Taliban, General, are these fairly regular calls to the Taliban, a la deconfliction with the Syrian army, or you recall those, the Russian army? Deconfliction calls are regular, and is there fairly good communication? Do they speak good English? Do they understand what we're conveying?
So let's just talk about communication at echelon, meaning, from higher to lower. I think those continued regular talks at the TPC at that level, those things continue. You heard reported earlier in the week from Mr. Kirby, about CENTCOM commander having communications. CENTCOM has other military channels open that there is continuous at that level. Then at the tactical level, as we speak, at the 2-star level, for those type of talks happen. And these are the discussions that are happening to allow the further increase of information to the checkpoints of who needs to come through, what passes look like, what are the right credentialing to get through, who needs to come. And then, that at the lowest tactical level, those other discussions, of course, those are always, I would say, probably a little harder, just the community, but those are happening. I mean, making sure that what needs to be communicated is done.
While I got you up there too, General Milley the other day talked about the after-action process will continue, and now's not the time to talk about it. But any emerging theories on why the Afghan army collapsed? I mean, you've been studying this for years. I mean, is there any emerging theory? Negotiated settlements. The Post talked about that earlier in the week. Negotiated settlements that started last year at the village level and then went to the district and province level. Any emerging theories?
As the chairman said, after action reviews will happen at the appropriate time, and that guidance has been given. And I would tell you at the operations level, that focus is just like President, laser focused on the current flights of the current mission right now.
Joe, can I ask one quick thing about Taliban communications?
Sure.
Do you get a sense there's a strict command structure? Or there's a sense there's various Taliban militias around the city that if you talk to one Taliban leader, these guys in these militias going to say, well, I'm not going to listen, I'm going to do my own thing, not letting people through. Can you talk about that, and is it a problem?
I can't personally give you that level of detail you want, but what I do know, which I think is a positive, is there's constant communication and it's being received, right? And we're seeing that things that we are asking for, passage and that is happening and getting better.
Yeah, Jared.
Yeah. For the time being, up until now, have all U.S. flights from the Kabul airport gone to Qatar? And a follow-up, now with planes going to Ramstein, how many other nations have offered to house Afghan evacuees, and of those, which are the most viable? And lastly, are you looking for foreign facilities, or is it exclusively American facilities like Ramstein in these foreign countries that you're looking at?
Qatar has been the first way station for the evacuation flights that we've been conducting, and because we've been doing it so consistently, that's one of the reasons we reached capacity there as quickly as we did. We are grateful for other countries who have already agreed to accept additional numbers, and we're working out the details of that with them right now. I'll let those countries speak to their contributions and the State Department. But from a military perspective, we are in need of additional capacity, and we're grateful that other countries are going to be helping us out with that capacity, even if it is obviously on a temporary basis, but to help us with the throughput, because we saw what happened today when that was the limiting factor. It wasn't aircraft on the ground, it wasn't people queued up and manifested, it was a destination, and so it's good to have that freed up right now. And as I think I answered, I think it was Jen's question, obviously a large portion of these individuals will come to the United States, and we've got 3 military bases now set to receive them: Fort Lee, Fort McCoy, and Fort Bliss. And the capacity at those 3 bases, we want to get up to 22,000 capacity. We're not there yet, understandably, but we're building out to that. And as the Secretary has made clear to the Department, that if we need to offer additional U.S. installations here in the continental United States, we'll do that. But right now, we think we can get up to 22,000 in relatively short order here over the next coming days and weeks, and we'll see where that goes.
But aside from SIVs, so let's say the P2s or other Afghans who are at risk, would you look at, say, foreign installations like maybe Aviano Air Base in Italy, or other U.S. bases in continental Europe?
That's really a better question put to the State Department that runs that part of the immigration process. That really wouldn't be our call to make.
Understood.
Yeah, Gordon.
John, does the Secretary currently possess the authorities he needs to call up more forces if needed, or does he have to ask the White House for sign-off?
If he was going to make a major muscle movement in terms of additional forces of a significant size, he would absolutely want to have that conversation with the Commander-in-Chief.
Sure, but I mean, given that the possibility that their major muscle movement may occur in the future, has that like pre-authority in effect already been?
I'm not going to get into the planning process, Gordon, but we feel like with the additional capacity that we have, that should there be a need to expand the mission in any way, that we have what we require. And if that would change, if it would require a change, you can bet that General McKenzie would flow up his recommendations, the Secretary would review them, as would the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and we'd go from there. Yeah.
Just following up on that, have any more forces been put on ready to deploy orders?
No.
No. And then how long was the airfield closed for? Was it 6 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours?
Yeah, it was roughly 6 to 7.5 hours right in there.
And then during that time, what was happening? Were you trying to get other countries to accept the refugees, the evacuees, or what was happening in that?
So first of all, on the airfield, processing kept continuing. So when we say really what's happening, just flights were paused to, I think like I said earlier, to allow for backlog, to ensure reception of folks leaving Kabul. So we were scheduling other flights and ensuring that we could get those flights out first as we brought other flights in.
Can I ask one, since that pause has restarted in that 6 to 7 hours, how many flights have gone out since then?
So before I left, right before I came in here, we'd had 3 leave Qatar, and 1 left Kabul, and 1 was getting ready to take off from Kabul.
So since the pause and the restart, 1 has left, and
That's right.
potentially a second?
Potentially second, yeah.
Can I follow up on that, sir, very quickly?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it accurate and correct that the backlog at that time on the airfield of Afghans that couldn't board planes because they couldn't land them anywhere. Was that backlog about 10,000 people? Or more?
Less than. I don't have the exact number, sorry about that, but it was less than that.
Less than 10?
Yeah, I
But
think,
in the thousands.
right.
So at that time, since they were there for 7.5, maybe as much as 8 hours, was there sufficient food, water, and sanitation? Are they sleeping outside on the airfield? How is all that
Reports are
working?
that it was sufficient, but we are actively continue to ensure it is sufficient for the future and continuing as we build out even more.
Did they, the people who were stuck there for so long, did they have food, water, and
Yes,
sanitation?
and I have no report that they didn't.
Thank you.
General Taylor, I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
want to follow up on the 169 Americans who were rescued. Was that an incident where a commander took a decision and left the wire to help those people? Were weapons drawn, or did that commander ask for a higher up authority to leave the wire?
Yeah, I'm going to absolutely get more. But, you know, as you look about the gate and where they are, you already see that, you know, the soldiers that are out there are starting now to increase that capability, that security around the gate. But the specific details of that, I don't have. But as Mr. Kirby said, I'm going to get.
Yeah, we're just trying to figure out, because we've been told there have been no hostile interactions with the Taliban, but if the Taliban were stopping those Americans from getting to the gate and a U.S. service member had to go to rescue them, was it a tense situation where weapons drawn?
Sure.
That would count as
I can
a
understand the
hostile
question.
interaction.
Yeah, we'll have to get you more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Tom. Me or Jim? Tom. Paul. I'm sorry, Paul. Okay. I'm sorry. All right. Guys, the mask is killing me.
Two questions. One, if you've restarted the flights to from Kabul, the people we hear from inside Qatar say that the wait is 3 to 5 days to get out of there. It's so backed up. Where are you flying these people to? Are you already flying them to another country?
Yeah, so like we said earlier, that constraint of ensuring we have other flights scheduled and the timing of those, that's already being worked, and increasing our throughput throughout the entire chain requirements of flights. And so flights that left, as Mr. Kirby said, some of those were going in and planned for the United States.
When you say flights that left Qatar to the U.S., so you're saying right now you're at a pace where the incoming and the outgoing from in Qatar is more, there's some equilibrium?
Getting there.
Okay. Are they flying to other countries yet? Other ISPs?
I don't have that report, those flight plans yet. I mean, that's very, an extremely dynamic piece, but I don't have those flight schedules as of right now.
Okay. Follow up. We've seen videos of babies being hefted over the barbed wire and walls, and U.S. servicemen taking them on. Can you tell us what's going on? Are these babies of families who have visas, have U.S. passports? Are they Afghans? Are they people with credentials?
So
What's
we do
happening
know-
to their
I have the
families?
details.
Okay, yeah.
The video you're talking about, the parent asked the Marines to look after the baby because the baby was ill. And so the Marine you see reaching it over the wall took it to a Norwegian hospital that's at the airport. They treated the child and returned the child to the child's father.
Was there only one?
I'm only aware of the one incident, but it was an act of compassion because there was concern about the
Are
the
they going to
babies.
be brought out, the
I don't
father,
know.
or were they put back outside the airport?
I don't know, Jen. The baby was returned to its father. I don't know I don't know where they are now. We don't. I mean, obviously, we have a responsibility to return a child to the child's parent, and I don't know who the parent is and whether whether they're an SIV applicant or I don't have that level of detail. But I think this was a very humane act of compassion by the Marines, and it's exactly the kind of skill and professionalism the general talked about. I already got you. Go ahead.
I have a question for the general. Sir, I was wondering if now that the airport is secure, if you could take us back to the breach that occurred on Monday.
Okay.
What's the latest assessment of how that occurred? What forces were in the area of that part of the airport at the time, and what was the interaction there?
As we know early on, as we built combat power, and in that early stages, it was very dynamic. We assessed after that happened and obviously reinforced, and throughout those days have ensured that the 360-degree perimeter is. I don't have the tactical AR that was not a requirement to pass that up to the Joint Staff, but what I do know is that that was quickly fixed, and the commanders there were able to use the assets they had immediately, and then as we built more combat power to ensure that hasn't happened since then.
Was there any interaction with the Taliban ongoing on this?
Always. I mean, like I said earlier, that communication at that level is continuous and happening.
Okay, we've got time for just one more, and I haven't taken in hardly any from the phones. Therese.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Going back to the children that were being passed over the wall, is there going to be any, regulations stating that this should not be happening, to kind of regulate that parents aren't taking their children and trying to pass them off to get them inside the gate?
I know of no such effort to do that, Therese. Again, these are U.S. servicemen and women deployed in a still dangerous and difficult mission. And I think what you saw there is the same thing that you saw when that Air Force jet packed to capacity with people wanting to get out. They're doing the best they can to be as compassionate as they can. And again, the baby was not harmed. It was treated for whatever the illness was and returned to the father. And I think you're seeing again these men and women incredibly brave, doing the best they can to be as compassionate as they can. And I think you're going to continue to see that kind of compassion going forward. Okay, guys, we got to get going. Thank you very much.
So that was Pentagon spokesman John Kirby, and we were also listening to General Major Hank Taylor about the situation from the defense side, from the Pentagon's perspective. They said that American troops were able to receive some Americans from just outside the perimeter of the Kabul airport. Let's bring in former Navy SEAL Jack Carr, who led assault and sniper teams in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's also the author of The Devil's Hand. Jack, welcome back. Good to have you with us today. I know you've been watching the president this afternoon and watching this news conference at the Pentagon. The reason that this particular question is out there is because we have seen the United Kingdom and we've seen France running missions and getting their own people back home outside that perimeter with success. And the United States has said that we will not go outside the airport perimeter to lift people, to help them, to get them into the airport. What do you think about all that?
Well, I watched the president's brief, I watched the briefing at the Pentagon, and I'll say that had I written these into my political thrillers, people would not believe that we had leaders that were so inept. And specific to your question, I heard the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff talk about not having that capability to go out and rescue Americans in Kabul on Wednesday, and I heard that reiterated today. I would be shocked if we have not moved forces forward to start building target packages, start locating these American citizens out there in Kabul to be able to go and do that. But we've seen the UK do it. France has done it. I just heard that Germany has been doing that, and people like to make fun of the French, but their special operators are no joke, and they're probably going out there. They are crushing the enemy. They are getting their citizens to the airport and out. And I'd be surprised if we weren't. Once again, our military has been handed an untenable, violent, dynamic situation, and they're going to figure it out on the ground. Brave men and women are there right now. They're locating these American citizens, and it's also shocking that we didn't know. We had 20 years to figure this out. We had months to figure out where these citizens were in the country, so that if this happened, we could go and get them. We're in country, we're back in Afghanistan. Any American went missing, everything stopped, and that became our primary mission. So we are very good at that at the tactical level.
I don't think any American doubts that American forces have the ability to carry out these missions. It seems they don't have the resources, the number of people, and I would imagine that the main reason is that they haven't been given the authorization. As I think we really just heard from Major General Taylor. He said, we are always in the planning purposes, but we don't have the direction. We haven't been given that mission to go outside the perimeter. But then there's this issue of these 169 people who they say were sort of plucked very close to the perimeter, and they didn't have any details on exactly what happened or whether or not they were being sort of saved from Taliban who was harassing them. We really don't know, but 169 people is a fair amount of people. What went through your mind when you're listening to the back and forth on that, and just how tentative it all is in terms of information and commitment?
Yeah, I'm thinking that it is American forces on the ground taking the initiative and figuring it out with little or no guidance from senior level officials. That's what it sounds like to me. Of course, I could be off on that because they don't have any information and haven't given us any information on that. But our forces are out there. They're probably feeling like they don't have a lot of support right now, and I'm sure some is flowing in because this is such a disaster and it was so preventable. But another thing about all this, when they're talking about when the president's talking about no national interest in Afghanistan during that press briefing, I couldn't help but thinking what message that sends to not just the troops who serve there, but the families of those who didn't make it home, or the families of those who came home dealing with the physical and emotional trauma of the battlefield. Like, at what point did we not have an interest there? Was it this past Friday? Was it 10 years ago when we got Osama bin Laden? At what point did we stop having a national interest in Afghanistan? What are you going to tell those families about that? That's what really hit me as part of that presidential briefing.
Jack Carr, thank you very much, as always. Thank you for your service, and good to speak with you again. We know that the capacity lies there for our special forces to do these missions. We're seeing other countries doing them, and it sounds like there's a little bit of tentativeness in terms of making that commitment at this point. My thanks to Jack Carr. Let's bring in Benjamin Hall, foreign correspondent, has spent a lot of time in the region, and he is live in London. Benjamin, your thoughts as you listen to this discussion about these 169 people that were plucked from somewhere outside the perimeter. And I thought it was interesting that John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesperson, kept saying they were very, very close to the airport, almost as if he didn't want anyone to be offended by how far they went outside the perimeter. I don't mean to read into his meaning, but that was sort of the suggestion in some of what he was saying. It was a bit defensive, it sounded like. What were your thoughts, Ben?
Yeah, it's very, very curious because, first of all, we're seeing other countries going out, taking part in these operations. We're seeing the French go back and forth to their embassy. The Germans, the Brits are doing it. And in fact, when the French do it, President Biden said earlier, or I believe Kirby said earlier, that the US were giving them overhead support. So they're supporting these missions. And I can't help but think, what is the deal that the US have done with the Taliban? What are the conditions of this deal whereby they don't attack the airport, they allow the safe passage of Americans? And it's striking that the US are dealing with the Taliban in this way and not just going out forcefully and saying, we will bring back Americans wherever they are. Whether or not these 169 Americans were just across the wall and have difficulties getting through the crowd, and we've heard that from other nationals as well, they got that far but they just couldn't get into the airport, or whether perhaps indeed the Americans did go out and they don't want to give away operational information, we're not sure. But it is bizarre that the Americans continue to insist they do not have the authority to go out, and even yesterday the Pentagon said they didn't have the forces available to do so. It's a very strange conundrum.
Benjamin Hall, thank you very much for all of your coverage today. Great panel earlier talking about your experiences and how clearly you reported for Fox that the Taliban was regrouping in Kabul, and that the surprise at the downfall and how speedy it was is really surprising when you look back at some of the things that you reported back then. So I encourage everybody to go back and take a look at your reporting from November of 2020. Ben, thank you very much. Good to see you. General Jack Keane, obviously watching all of this with us. He is standing by, but first here's Fox's Jennifer Griffin pressing the Pentagon on the presence of al-Qaeda, which the president said they're gone. The president said there's no al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Watch this. But the president just said that there is no al-Qaeda presence in Afghanistan, and that does not seem to be correct.
What we don't think is that what we believe is that there isn't a presence that is significant enough to merit a threat to our homeland as there was back on 9/11 20 years ago.
The president also said there is no national security interest, no national interest in Afghanistan. I'm a little confused by that. Can you explain why there's no national interest in Afghanistan? Why did we have troops there for 20 years if there's no national interest in Afghanistan?
We had a significant interest in being in Afghanistan to our national security 20 years ago.
Our national security and Pentagon reporter Jennifer Griffin joining me now on the phone. General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, good to have you with us. As I said earlier, this was an opportunity at the Pentagon for reporters to continue to press. It was pretty quick with the president, about 17 minutes, and a lot of people had remaining questions that they got to ask at the Pentagon. What's your takeaway from what you heard on this back and forth about going outside the perimeter in particular, and anything else that struck you?
Yeah, well, it's profoundly disappointing. This is the United States of America, the best military on the planet by far. We've got great leaders, we've got imagination, we've got unbelievable soldiers. Our soldiers go through a wall to protect American citizens and to get the Afghans out of there who are our partners. This is risk aversion, is what we're seeing played out in front of us here. The Brits and the French are taking care of their people. I have it on good sourcing that the Germans, the Dutch, and the Indians have also gone out to get their people. The people they sent out weren't always military people. You know, they were indeed people who worked for their State Department to go out and get some others. I think we have overstated the risk involved here, and what we actually see is people are being paralyzed by the fear of adverse consequences. And that is what is keeping the United States of America inside that airport and not going out there and getting our people. And for the president to suggest that there's no problem getting through the Afghan checkpoint and that the Afghan people are not being stopped, he hadn't heard that they were being stopped, it is not reality. We have been reporting on it on Fox all day long, anecdotal evidence of that. I have a personal example of a group of 30 that are all documented by the State Department that tried to get to the airport, and the Taliban stopped them twice, and they still haven't made. We should go get them. It's not hard to find out where the people are. We can set up pickup hubs to do it. We can actually use some helicopters to do it. But anyway, it is one of the most disappointing things I've seen. And I think where we're heading here, Martha, which gives me such concern, is we're going to say, well, we got the American citizens out, or most of them out, and we did the best we could with our Afghan partners. And I fear that we're not going to leave a few thousand of them behind. We're going to leave tens of thousands of them behind. And we all know what the consequence is. I mean, we've had ample evidence that they will kill them and kill their families, because that is what they have already done. This is a very frustrating and sad situation to see.
Yeah, we heard the president say, we think we can get the Afghans out in time by August 31st, but he said, but then we'll see. And that I think that backs up exactly what you're saying there, General. He also said there's a lot of Afghanis, whether they helped us or not, that would like to come to America, so they have to figure out essentially who sort of has earned the right to come. That from the president. General Jack Keane, thank you very much, General. We'll hear from you later. I want to bring in just for a moment here Florida Congressman Michael Waltz. Joining me, he served multiple combat tours in Afghanistan as a Special Forces officer and is the first Green Beret to serve in Congress. Congressman, you were just on a conference call with Defense Secretary Austin and the chair of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley. What was said in that briefing? What did you pick up there that might fill in some pieces here?
Well, what was so interesting is we had, and sad, frankly, is that we had the President of the United States stand before the world and as Commander-in-Chief say that he doesn't have any evidence of Americans running into any kind of trouble or having issue getting to the airport, as though they want to just kind of hang out behind enemy lines in Kabul. Yet on this call with Secretaries Blinken, Austin, and Chairman Milley, the Secretary of Defense said they have reports of Americans being beaten, being stopped at checkpoints, being harassed, being turned around, having their documents taken. So right there we have a contradiction. Martha, I don't know if President Biden is lying, filled with spin, heartless, or clueless, or all of the above. But this is just disgusting as an American, as a veteran, and as a member of of Congress. I have so many questions. By the way, this is the second call that we've had that's been cut off, and we haven't been able to ask all the questions of this panel.
Yeah. Congressman Michael Waltz from Florida, thank you for your service. Thank you for talking with us today. We'll check back in with you as this story continues to unfold. We want to go to the State Department. Spokesperson Ned Price is now in the middle of his briefing and Q&A. Let's see what he has to say.
Is the safety and the security of the American people. To do that, we have set up an unprecedented task force with the sole goal of locating and offering guidance to any U.S. citizen who may be present in Afghanistan and who wishes to depart. Hundreds of consular officers from across our Bureau of Consular Affairs and our posts worldwide are taking part in this effort. This task force uses all available data to contact U.S. citizens who may still be present in Afghanistan to determine how best to assist each one of them. Each U.S. citizen who has contacted us and who may still be present in Afghanistan will receive a personalized communication, and in many cases, that's a phone call, to determine their present location and potential interest in repatriation. U.S. citizens requesting assistance who have not already completed what's called the Rapid Assistance Request Form, which is available on the embassy's website, should do so as soon as possible. We encourage all U.S. citizens in Afghanistan to enroll in the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, regardless of if they need assistance, so that we can be in a position to communicate important information going forward. Second, I'll share an update on our ongoing intensive diplomatic efforts. Over the past several days, we have mobilized a global effort through diplomatic channels to evacuate U.S. citizens, personnel from partner nations, and of course, at-risk Afghans from Kabul. We extend special thanks to our partners around the globe who have been instrumental in this operation in all of its many parts. Bahrain, Denmark, Germany, Italy, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Qatar, Tajikistan, Turkey, the UAE, the United Kingdom, and Uzbekistan have been or will soon be transiting Americans, or in some circumstances, others through their territories to safety. Albania, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, Chile, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Mexico, Poland, Qatar, Rwanda, Ukraine, and Uganda have also made generous offers regarding the relocation efforts for at-risk Afghans. We deeply appreciate the support they have offered, and we are proud to partner with them in our shared support for the Afghan people. We are very encouraged that other countries are also considering providing additional support, and this is something on which we will continue to be focused. Finally, this morning, Secretary Blinken participated in a virtual meeting of NATO foreign ministers to discuss the ongoing security and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan, as well as our joint efforts with NATO allies and other partners to safely evacuate our citizens and our Afghan allies who may be at risk. The allies agreed that any future government must adhere to Afghanistan's international obligations, safeguard the human rights of all Afghans, and that includes, of course, women, children, and minorities, uphold the rule of law, allow unhindered humanitarian access, and ensure that Afghanistan never again serves as a safe haven for terrorism. Secretary Blinken also conveyed his deep appreciation for Allied sacrifices and commitment over 2 decades alongside us in Afghanistan, as well as our enduring commitment to the alliance going forward. One additional element before we get to your questions. Today, in concert with the United Kingdom, the United States is imposing additional costs on the Russian Federation on the 1-year anniversary of the poisoning of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny, which of course was used with a Novichok nerve agent. Together with our allies, we condemn the August 2020 attempt on Alexei Navalny and subsequent actions intended to stop his efforts to hold the Russian government accountable, including his imprisonment in January of this year. It's clear that Russian officials targeted Mr. Navalny for his activism and efforts to reveal what are uncomfortable truths about Russian officials' corruption and his efforts to give voice to Russian citizens' legitimate grievances with their government and its policies. Our actions today, which were exercised by the U.S. Departments of State, Treasury, Justice, and Commerce, send a clear signal that there will be no impunity for the use of chemical weapons, including for the individuals and the organizations involved in this case. Any use of chemical weapons is unacceptable and contravenes international norms. The United States calls upon Russia to comply with its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention. We reiterate our call for the Russian government to immediately and unconditionally release Mr. Navalny. The department also submitted a report to Congress today, pursuant to the Protecting Europe's Energy Security Act of 2019, or PISA, as we call it, to continue to address Nord Stream 2. As a result, 2 Russian entities will be sanctioned, and 2 Russian vessels will be listed as blocked property. As we have said, the administration continues to oppose Nord Stream 2 as a bad deal for Ukraine and a bad deal for Europe, and a harmful Russian geopolitical project. We remain committed to implementing PISA, even as we take steps to reduce the risk an operational NS2 pipeline would pose to European energy security and the security of Ukraine and frontline NATO and EU countries. With today's action, the administration has now sanctioned 7 persons and identified 16 of their vessels as blocked property pursuant to PISA in connection with this Nord Stream 2 project. The administration continues to work with Germany, with Ukraine, and other allies and partners to implement the July 21st joint statement that we agreed to with Germany on support for Ukraine, energy security, and our climate goals. Today's actions send a clear signal to Russia that the United States is united in our commitment to impose costs on Russia for its aggression and malign activities, and to support a more secure and sustainable energy future for Ukraine and our partners in Europe. With that, I don't know where to begin since we're missing our front row, but please.
I have a couple questions.